But let's quickly recap while we have a chance, while people are working, so we have an excuse to recap. So Reb Yaakov came up with an earth-shattering chiddush that lo yomer sefer Torah zeh mipicha v'gisa b'yom v'layla, that the word sefer Torah hazeh, Rashi learns Mishnah Torah hayu lefanav. When God came to Yoshua to talk to him, the Navi tells us that God saw Yoshua with a Sefer Torah, and he said, "Lo yomush Sefer Torah hazeh," right? Because Yoshua had the Sefer Torah, and Rashi says Sefer Mishnah Torah hayu lefanav. Okay, so the Abarbanel learns that Rashi means Sefer Dvarim, and that's the way Reb Yaakov is well learned. The Abarbanel disagrees with Rashi. He says it means the whole Torah. Okay, but the way he learns Rashi is the way Reb Yaakov learns Rashi, Sefer Dvarim. And the question is, why did Yoshua have a separate Sefer called Sefer Dvarim, as it's not sort of part of the rest of the Torah? Like, what is miyuchad about it? That's number one. Number two, we do find that Mishnah Torah has a unique place in the 8th year of Shemitah, where the king reads Sefer Dvarim. And as a kid, I told you, I was always told, and my Rebbe always said that Sefer Dvarim, because it's a short version of the rest of the Torah, right? That's what people, so to speak, made up. That's why the king read it. Rabbi Yaakov is going to come up with an earth-shattering chiddush. Why the king Dafka read Mishnah Torah has nothing to do with it being a synopsis of the other 4 books, because it's not a synopsis of the other 4 books. Okay? Okay, so Reb Yaakov said that...
Okay, I just wanted to... excuse me, I just wanted to announce that if you look on your WhatsApp group, you can see the 3 pages there.
Oh, great, thanks. La Briut. The question is...
So
do you
what
see
page
it?
are we on Yoshua now?
No, I'm just recapping. I'm not reading, I'm just recapping. So I'm just saying, Reb Yaakov was trying to answer what was special about Sefer Devarim, that it was in front of Yoshua, according to Rashi, and why did the Melech only read Sefer Mishnah Torah? Why did Yoshua had Mishnah Torah in front of him, and why did the king read only Mishnah Torah on the 8th year? So Reb Yaakov said that Mishnah Torah has a special place. By the way, I didn't forget Jonathan's question. I looked into it a little bit. There are actually 2 questions. I looked into one so far. So Reb Yaakov says that Sefer Mishnah Torah, which we call Dvarim, is Latikun Hanhogas Hamadina. Reb Yaakov has all these expressions. I'm going to repeat them all for you. Some of them were written in the Ksav Yad, some of them he said in Yiddish, and Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky translated into Hebrew. But I'll show you all the different Lashonas he uses for Sefer Dvarim. The first Lashon he uses, Latikun Hanhogas Hamadina, that the Sefer Mishnah Torah is there to make sure that Medinat Yisrael, if I'm allowed to use that word, right, Medinat Yisrael is running well and properly. Okay, that's Sefer Dvarim. All the mitzvahs in Sefer Dvarim have a national nature today. Ofi le'umi. That's another word he uses, right? Now, that's why Lo Yavo B'Kahal Hashem, right? All the B'Kahal Hashems, the Mamzer, the Ammoni, Moavi, the Mitzri, it's all in Sefer Dvarim, no other place, because it has relevant to Kahal Hashem. Okay, mezuzah and makeh, Rabbi Yaakov said, the mezuzah has to do with the Jewish home, right? Which we talk a lot about in Sefer Dvarim, marriage, divorce, yibum, right? We talk about how the Jewish family, Jewish home has to look. It has to have a makeh and it has to have mezuzah. By the way, I tried to, because Jonathan said that Kriya Shema is also in the first parsha. Second parsha seems very much like a national paragraph, right? Because it's talking about, the Jewish farmers and the rain and, and listening to, the nation. It's in Lashon Rabbah, but Jonathan said the Kriya Shema itself is Lashon Yachid, right? The parsha, and yet it's here. So I thought I would talk about Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Shema Yisrael, and that would make it something more klali. But I asked Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky, and he felt that it was more about the mezuzah, learning Torah, mezuzah, and tefillin. He said those were more of a national nature. Mezuzah, Reb Yaakov says, is part of the home. Torah is part of what makes us the Klal Yisrael, and that's also in Vishinantam Levanecha. That has very much to do with how you raise children and how you build yeshivas and so on and so forth. And he said that also tefillin, which tefillin is a little bit harder for me to hear, because Reb Yaakov actually said that Mila was not a Ofi Le'umi, right? Which that's a little bit problematic for me, I have to admit. I would have thought, because today we look at Mila, that every Jew gets a Brit Mila, even the ones that are completely secular. I'm not saying everyone, but many people give their kids a Brit Mila and celebrate Pesach and Hanukkah, and that's it, right? But tefillin, I know, just like Mila, was considered a national mitzvah, because the Romans and the Greeks, the Romans assered tefillin and they assered Mila as well, and the Greeks assered Mila. So it seems like it was viewed as something more nationalistic. So I don't exactly know, but Rabbi Yosef said tefillin is definitely considered something of a national thing. He didn't go into the idea of the Romans. I know for a fact the Romans, that's a Gemara. The Gemara says that, Elisha Bal Knafayim ran away from the Romans with his tefillin on, and he took them off, and the Romans asked what's in his hand, and it was pigeons, right? So that's why we roll our tefillin on both sides, according to some opinions, right? But that's what he said. But I think in the first parsha, you do have the concept of Vishinantam Levanecha, you have the mezuzah. These are ideas that I think Reb Yaakov could get away with. Now, the Rabbi Yaakov also said the Gimel Regolim are in the Torah, but not Rosh and Dvarim, but not Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. They're not in Dvarim, right? Because again, the Regolim were a national, what would you call it? A national chag, or a national get together of the Jewish people, where the king was, because that's exactly why Yeravam didn't want the Jews going up to Yerushalayim, because he was nervous that the Malchus would revert back to the kings of Jerusalem, Malchei Beis David. So you see that the Beis Hamikdash and the kingdom was very much connected, and that's the Sholosh Regalim. Korban Pesach, he says in Divrei Hayom, you see Korban Pesach, which is repeated in Sefer Dvarim. All the halachas of Pesach are in Parshas Bo, but Korban Pesach is repeated in Sefer Dvarim as part of the regal of Pesach. And Reb Yaakov showed in Sefer Divrei Hayom, in both Chizkiyahu in his time and Yoshio in his time, both took charge of the Korban Pesach, because the Korban Pesach was a Korban Halaom. It was a national korban, not just a korban of, particular korban. We also see it was families that got together and made Pesach. Okay.
Can I just say, Rabbi Shurin, what about Yom Kippur? Seems to have some of those things also.
It doesn't. There's no. Let's put it this way: there's no mitzvah to come up l'regel on Yom Kippur. That's what Reb Yaakov was claiming. In other words, did someone have to go to the Beis Hamikdash when the Kohen was doing the avoda? I don't know if they had to go to the Beis Hamikdash.
No, but it's just like he's doing it on our behalf. So
exactly. So he's doing it on our behalf, and it doesn't really require so much that we get involved in that. But whereas the Regolim are really our national holiday, so to speak. It's our the American Thanksgiving, so to speak, right? It's a national holiday. Now, the last thing he said was a very interesting thing. I didn't make much about it, but I think at a certain point we'll have to make, maybe next week we'll make more about it. But in Divrei Hayomim, they quote Sefer Moshe, and it's referring to Sefer Dvarim, and over there it says that Amatzio, when he took power, didn't kill the people who tried to overthrow his father, even though it's why? Because lo yumsu avos al banim, v'banim lo yumsu al avota. Right? Now they use that pasuk in Divrei Hayomim for something we never used before. The pasuk in Dvarim, where it appears in Dvarim, the Chazal, and I think Rashi actually brings it, but Chazal say it, it's a very famous Chazal, that a father can't testify about a son can't testify about a father. That's talking Nogeya B'davar, Krove Mishpacha can't testify, Lo Yumsu Avos al Banim, Ubanim Lo Yumsu al Avosa. Right? Now, what?
Today's daf.
Daf Yomi today.
In Sanhedrin?
Yeah.
It's what's with regard to? Oh, it's regard to right. That's right. It's regard to like testimony, correct? Yeah. So the pasuk seems to say that they're learning it that the king can't kill the kids of the people he killed, the morde b'malchus, can't kill because yum suavos albanim banim salvosa. So the text in Divrei Hayomim learns it a completely different way than your Gemara in Sanhedrin, which is a little bit problematic if you think about it. Someone has a problem here. Either Divrei Hayomim has a problem or the Gemara in Sanhedrin has a problem, right? Because like they're learning different pshatim. So that question already, if I'm not mistaken, the Ran in Sanhedrin asks, and you can probably look at the Ran over there. The Ran is a great sefer in Sanhedrin. Excellent sefer in Sanhedrin. It's good everywhere, but on Sanhedrin, he quotes somebody there, Rabbeinu David. He's always quoting Rabbeinu David. And Rabbeinu David is a very interesting approach to a lot of Sugyas Hashas in Sanhedrin, and in Pesachim also says Rabbeinu David. Reb Soloveitchik once said in the class, he says, Rabbeinu David, I think he was a brisker. He lived in the 1200s. I don't know what that means, but I think he was a brisker. Anyway, but the Ran talks about this question, raises this question, and talks about why you could learn two things from the same place. But all Reb Yaakov was interested in is that Amatzia quotes Sefer Devarim, right? And he links that pasuk to Malchus. Who says it links to Malchus? The answer is that everything in Sefer Devarim links to Malchus in one way or another. And therefore, that's how Reb Yaakov basically learns this idea of Sefer Moshe. Okay, Sefer Dvarim. Now, Reb Yaakov did mention this idea of Sefer Moshe being Sefer Dvarim. This week, we're going to get what Reb Yaakov says about Sefer Dvarim. Okay? Now, I started this piece on Tuf Mem Zayin, even though the beginning of the pasuk is on Tuf Mem Vav. But that's all it is on Tuf Mem Vav is just the beginning of the pasuk. So I didn't want to, another page for that. But it says, Bayomahu in the pasuk, Nikra b'Sefer Moshe, Boznei Ha'am, v'nimtza katuv bo, asher lo yavo amoni u'ma'ovi b'kal elokim ad olam. Okay? It says that Ezra, I think over there, and it's really in Nehemiah, Reb Yaakov, you notice on top, it says Ezra, and then in parentheses, it says Nehemiah Yud Gimel Aleph, right? Why did Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky do that? Because Reb Yaakov was very anti creating a new book. Nehemiah doesn't exist as a book in the 24 Sfarim. It's number 25. Okay? So Reb Yaakov was very against it because the Christians divided Ezra into Ezra and Nehemiah. So Reb Yosef got nervous when he was publishing this. So he put Ezra, because it's all part of Sefer Ezra according to the Chazal and Baba Basra. And Nehemiah is what it is according to the Goyim. So no one would know where to look if he wouldn't do this. So he put it in parentheses. Okay, so in there it says, Bayomahu, Nikra b'Sefer Moshe ba'oznei ha'am v'nimtza kosev bo asher lo yavo amonim yovi b'kal Hashem b'kal Elokim. Okay, they read in Sefer. It says Sefer Moshe, and we know that lo yovi amonim yovi b'kal Hashem is in Sefer Dvarim, and it's called Sefer Moshe. Okay, now there's a few other places where Sefer Moshe is referring to Dvarim. Now, Reb Yaakov is going to discuss this, and he comes up with another earth-shattering chiddush about Sefer Dvarim. Okay, Yesh la'ir.
Well, Shurin, excuse me, I lost my place. Can you tell us again what page you're on?
Page Tov Mem Zayin on the top.
Okay.
But Yesh la'ir. You see that?
Yeah.
Shebachol makom koroto Sefer Toras Moshe. A lot of places in Tanach you'll see our Sefer Torah is called Sefer Toras Moshe. V'kad karu Sefer Moshe. And all of a sudden here, and we'll see a few other places, it's called Sefer Moshe. The Efsher Shazel Kinuyo Shel Sefer Dvarim. This is referring to Sefer Dvarim. It could be we refer to Sefer Dvarim as Sefer Moshe. Now, the Rabbi Yaakov is about to quote that famous Gemara in Baba Batra and learn a completely new pshat in it. Okay? Ukidashkam Baba Basra. Like, oh, no, he doesn't quote it yet. He's learned different plates in Baba Batra. Daf Pei Ches Amid Beis. Bo Re'ei Shalo Kamidas HaKadosh Baruch Hu Midas Basav Adam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Barech Et Yisrael B'Chaf Beis Otiot, I guess it says over there, Me'im B'Chukosai Ad Komiyut V'Kola B'Ches Me'Ve'im B'Chukosai Timosu V'Chulei Ve'ilu Moshe Bercham B'Ches in eight letters V'Kolam B'Chav Beis letters, right? Bercham B'Ches Me'V'Hayim Shamoa Tishma V'Ad L'Avdam V'Kilam B'Chav Beis V'Hayim Ad V'Ein Koneh. So Rabbi Yaakov doesn't quote the whole Gemara. The Gemara basically says that it shows that God is easier going than Moshe. Okay, why? Because Moshe, God blesses the Jewish people with 22 letters, the whole alphabet, and he curses the Jewish people with 8 letters. Whereas Moshe curses the Jewish people with 22 letters, right? And he blesses the people with 8 letters. Okay, now he says God versus Moshe. Now, and referring to the Tochacha and Parshas in Sefer Vayikra, that's God, and in Dvarim it's Moshe, right? And the Gemara refers to it as Moshe cursing the Jewish people. What the heck? It's it's still God. What does that have to do with why is it Moshe? Right? So Reb Yosef in 78 says, V'yoter mufurash b'Megillah Lamed Aleph on Beis. This is the more famous Gemara. Amar Abai Loshana El B'Klola Shebetoras Kohanim. Aval Kol Shel Mishnah Torah Posei. My Tama Halo B'Loshem Rab Amors Umoshe Mipi Advura Amra. V'Halo B'Loshem Yochad Amors Umoshe Mipi Atzmam Amra. Right. The difference between Dvarim and Vayikra is that the Klolos and Sefer Vayikra, Moshe said them from the mouth of God. Right, and the ones and said in Loshen Yachid, and Moshe said the ones in Devarim, right, and they were Pi Atzmo Amram. He said it himself. Okay, so that Gemara says very clear that Moshe said the Klolos by himself. Okay, I do have to say that there are Mefarshim. If you take a look at Mefarshim Masechet Megillah, they do say that they asked the question, how could it be that Moshe said the klolot? And they try to give an answer why Moshe was allowed to give his own klolot. But of course, the rest of the Sefer Dvarim is not Moshe. That's God, right? But Reb Yaakov is using these two Gemaras. I heard from Reb Yaakov, by the way, the Gemara in 78. I didn't hear the Gemara in Baba Batra. Gemara in 78 is what Reb Yaakov said to me when he said this piece, right? But it doesn't matter. The Gemaras both in Baba Basra and in Megillah are both saying that the klolos in Sefer Dvarim, Moshe it's miyuchas to Moshe Rabbeinu, as opposed to Vayikra, as opposed to Bechukosai. Okay, so now Reb Yaakov says, Ad Kal Shon Gemara, I read the Korah leklolos the Mishnah Torah Shem Shel Moshe. V'ulai. Now Reb Yaakov says the following thing: the Masha'oma bePerakama the Baba Basra Daf Yudal Amud Beis Moshe Kosaf Sifro Uparshas Bilam. Okay, the Gemara over there says that Moshe wrote his Sefer and the Parsha of Bilam. Okay, let me just see if I can find my Gemara Baba Basra. My things are all out of place over here. Oh, here. Okay, so that's the famous Gemara there that gives you the different Nevi'im and Ksuvim, and then the Gemara asks about the Nevi'im and Ksuvim. Umi Katvam, who wrote them? Moshe Kotav Sifro Parshas Bilam ve'Iyov. Yoshua Kosav Sifro Shmona Psukim Shabbatorah. Shmuel Kosav Sifro v'Shoftim v'Rus. Right? Goes through all the different people. That's the Gemara in Baba Basra, Daf Yudal Amud Beis. Okay? So it says Moshe Kosav Sifro Parshas Bilam. How does everybody learn? Moshe wrote the Torah. From who? From God. God dictated it. Moshe wrote like a secretary. The Gemara in Daf Tesvav says that explicitly. Right? And he wrote Parshas Bilam, which is strange because everybody asks Parshas Bilam is part of the Torah. What do you mean he wrote Parshas Bilam? He wrote everything down, right? So why is Parshas Bilam significant that it is taken out of the rest of the Torah? But what does Reb Yaakov say? The L'chora Parshas Bilam Gamke B'chlal Sifrohi. It's also part of his Sefer. Kmo Parshas Korach. Doesn't say Moshe wrote Parshas Korach. Why Parshas Bilam, right? El al koch tzarchlom dechol Torah lo hoya Moshe rak sofer libler ba'alma. Moshe, with regard to the whole Torah, that's not Sefer Moshe. That is not Moshe Kosaf Sifro. Moshe didn't write that Sefer. He basically was dictated to, and he wrote it. I'll give you an example. Who wrote Sefer Eicha? Sefer Kinnos, it's called in the Gemara. The Gemara says Yirmiyahu wrote it. Okay, if you look in Sefer Yirmiyahu, Kapitel Lamed Vav, it says that Baruch wrote it. He wrote it from the mouth of Yirmiyahu. He says, I wrote it from the Yirmiyahu dictated to me, and I wrote it. Oh, well, then why does it say Baruch wrote Eicha? Because he didn't write it. He just typed it up, basically, right? So Rabbi Yaakov is basically saying, what do you mean Moshe wrote Sifro? He didn't write Sifro. He was just a person who was dictated to, and he was a good secretary. Okay? So, and what's with Parashas Bilam? Why does that stand out over here? Okay? El al kochet tzorchem d'chol Torah lo haya Moshe rak his sofer libler ba'alma. He was like a sofer. Tamrina daftes vav. Kodesh Baruch Hu Omer Moshe Omer v'kosef. The Gemara later on says, with regard to the Torah, God said it, Moshe said it, and wrote it. Moshe Nemar lahalan. The Gemara says, like it says later, Vayomer lehem Baruch. And Baruch said to the people that asked him in Sefer Yirmiyahu, right? Mipiv yikra elai, vani kosav al Sefer b'dio, right? He read it to me, right? From his mouth, he read it to me, and I wrote it on the Sefer. That's what Baruch says. And that's why it's attributed actually to Yirmiyahu. Avol Mishnah Torah hu atzmo, chibro v'sidro. This is the earth-shattering part. But Mishnah Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't write. God didn't dictate Mishnah Torah. He was mechaber to Mishnah Torah, and he was mesader to Mishnah Torah. Okay? Now, the question is, what does that mean? Did Moshe make up mitzvahs? Like, all the mitzvahs in Mishnah Torah that are new ones. That's Moshe Rabbeinu, right? That wasn't at Sinai, right? Ulefikach nikra sefer Moshe. That's why everywhere in Tanach, when it refers to Dvarim, it calls sefer Moshe. V'ayin b'yavamas. Now, this is an earth-shattering idea. Ayin yavamas, that Daf Daled Amals, the Gemara over there asks about smichut in the Torah with regard to, if I remember correctly, tzitzis and shatnez, right? That you're allowed to wear tzitzis that are shatnez, right? Because of the smichut. But Mishnah Torah dorish. The Gemara says even if someone, according to the opinions that don't drash smichut, right, smuchim in the rest of the Torah, Mishnah Torah they hold like they hold you're allowed to. In other words, Tosfos discusses why is Mishnah Torah different. Aval Shom Bagoyis Maharav Rutchenberg, right? Kosa b'shem Haravan. He writes in the name of Rebbe Eliezer ben Natan. The time of Mishum the Chol Torah Piagvura Nemra. They mugdam u'muchar. The whole Torah was said from God. And there's no mugdam mucha b'Torah. Aval Moshe shesider Mishnah Torah, parsha acher parsha lo sider el hidaresh. But Moshe was Masada Sefer Mishnah Torah. He was Masada in a way that you could drash it. That is the Ravan from the later part of the 12th century, 13th century. Okay, he says the words Aval Moshe shesider Mishnah Torah. Okay, he doesn't say he was Mechaber Mishnah Torah, but he was Mesader Mishnah Torah. Okay, so Reb Yaakov uses this as a proof that Mishnah Torah is different. You see that Moshe Rabbeinu had a hand in Mishnah Torah. Okay, so Moshe Rabbeinu could have decided which mitzvahs go into the rest of the Torah and which mitzvahs go into Mishnah Torah. Okay, which mitzvahs he's going to repeat in Mishnah Torah that were already in the other 4 books. So I told this to Rav Soloveitchik, okay? And when I told it to Rav Soloveitchik, I said to him the following thing. I started it with the Rashi in Yoshua. I said I want to ask the Rav Shaila. The Rashi in Yoshua says Sefer Mishnah Torah Yilafanav, Moshe had Sefer Dvarim, okay? Which seems like Sefer Dvarim had a special place somewhere or another. I didn't talk about the king, right? So he says to me right away, what are you talking about? Rashi says Mishnah Torah Lefanav because he had a din of Melech and Mishnah Torah. It says V'kosav Los Mishnah Torah Azos. So it says he had Mishnah Torah Lefanav, right? So wait a minute. It says he has to write Mishnah Torah, right? I said to her, so she says he has to write a Mishnah Torah, 2 Sifrei Torah, but you don't say Mishnah Torah Hayu Lefanav. You only had 1 Sefer Torah in front of you. So he right away kvetched and he said, but that was the Mishnah Torah. That was the 2nd Sefer Torah, the one that went out with him. So that was 2nd Sefer Torah. So then he says to me, and don't tell me the Ravon in Yavamas. That's what he says. Before I have a chance to say it to him, he says, and don't tell me the Ravon in Yavamas Daf Daled, right? So I said, why not? So he says, you weren't supposed to say this to me, and the Ravon shouldn't have said it. And then I was taken aback. He says about a Baal Tosfos. Tosfos shouldn't have said it. I mean, the Ravon was, I think, a grandchild of Rashi. I mean, he was one of the first Baalei Tosfos. He says that. So I said, but what about the Abarbanel? Now I didn't photocopy that Abarbanel for you, but if you take a look at Akdamat Dvarim, the Abarbanel says, I'll just read you one line. It's 5 pages, but I'll read you one line. He first introduces when he came up with this question when he was in Portugal, and Mila'ani libi lish'ol sheila gedola kolela sefer el dvar Mishnah Torah asher some Moshe v'nei b'nei Yisrael. Okay, v'chein gedoli chachmei haaretz yoshvei al Medina, yes to them, v'rosh yeshivas, and I wanted them to answer me. right? He says, and he writes, where does he write it? Here. Sha'alti ubikashti is Mishnah Torah Shesam Moshel Vnei Yisrael Ritzoni Lo with Sefer Elu Dvarim Hayim Me'es Hashem Min Hashamayim V'Advarim Asher Bo Moshe Amra Mipi Agvura Ki Yesed Divrei Torah Mibrachus Ad Leinei Kol Yisrael. When Moshe wrote Sefer Dvarim, it was just like the rest of the Torah. Or in Sefer Mishnah Torah, Zeh Amru Moshe Me'atzmo Chibro V'Omer. Right? He raises the question, and he raises it very sophisticated. He says, if I either way, I have questions. But he brings a lot of the rayas. He doesn't bring the Ravan, but he brings a lot of the rayas that Reb Yaakov brings about the Klolos of Mishnah Torah. He brings. Okay, so I said, but the Abarbanel also says it. So he gets angry at me, Reb Soloveitchik. He says, I quote you the Bali Toisvis, and you quote me the Abarbanel? That's what he says to me. I quote you the Bali Toisvis, you quote me the Abarbanel? Kilu, like, who's the Abarbanel anyway? So now I don't know if he knew the Abarbanel, because I don't think Reb Yaakov knew the Abarbanel. By the way, the Abarbanel does not come out like Reb Yaakov. The Abarbanel has a little bit of a different approach. I'm not going to go into it right now. But the point is, I told him in the name of Reb Yaakov, not in the name of Reb Yaakov, I told him without the name, that am I allowed to say that Mishnah Torah was, like the Ravon says, Moshe Rabbeinu was Mesader. There's mitzvahs in there that were new mitzvahs, right? And he says, you're not allowed to say it. And the Ravan wasn't allowed. He didn't say the Ravan shouldn't have said it. He didn't say it wasn't allowed. Shouldn't have said it. Okay. So then we continued walking. We started a new conversation because I saw he didn't want to discuss that. I get back after the summer and I say, Zaidi, we got a problem with your Dvar Torah, your Shtickle Torah that you said on Dvarim. He says, why? I said, I told it over to Rav Soloveitchik, but without mentioning your name. So he says, so what did he say? Reb Yaakov was very smile. He says, what did he say? He says, you're not allowed to say it. So Reb Yaakov said to him, what about the Ravan? So he says, I said, Rav Soloveitchik said he shouldn't have said that. He shouldn't have said it. So Reb Yaakov gets very serious. And he says the following thing. I told to Rav Hershel Shechter. Hershel Shechter was shaken up, and I told it to him. I said, Reb Yaakov got very serious. And I wouldn't say angry, but very, very serious. And he said, Rav Soloveitchik is not allowed to say it because he went to Berlin University. I'm allowed to say it because I went to Slobodka. That's the difference. In other words, because what does it sound like? It sounds like Bikorat Tanach. You understand when you say Sefer Dvarim was Moshe wrote it. It sounds very, very much like the Maskilim, and so Soloveitchik was very afraid of stuff like that. Even Girsas the Gemara shied away from, but Reb Yaakov wasn't afraid of stuff like that. Reb Yaakov was, into Girsas. He played around with them. One day I'll give you a share on a whole bunch of different Girsas that Reb Yaakov played around with. But the point over here is that Reb Yaakov felt that I didn't go to Berlin. I don't have that baggage of like the Mahaskola and Apikourses and Bikorat Tanach, Bikorat Mikra. I went to Slobodka, so I'm pure, and therefore I could say it without worrying. Am I being affected by outside hashkafa or something, right? So that's the way the conversation ended. Okay, but that was what Reb Yaakov said over here, right? And Lefikach Nira. So this is Reb Yaakov again. Lefikach Nira. That's the new paragraph on the left side of Tuf Mem Zayin. Fikach Nirish Gemara B'Baba Batra Shoelis Mikatvan Umeshiva Shemoshe Kosav Sifro. Now it makes sense. Moshe Kosav Sifro. That's the Sefer Moshe Rabbeinu, Sefer Devarim. Mit Kavenis to show Mi Chibram, right? Because the whole Gemara is talking about who's Mechaber. That's why it answers about Yirmiyahu that Yirmiyahu was Mechaber Kinnos, even though who wrote it? Actually wrote it down? Baruch. Uchuvas HaGemara, Shemoshe Chibur Sifrei Koach Sefer Devarim B'Luchud. It's going on Sefer Devarim. Okay? Now, I haven't seen a commentary that learns that Gemara like that. I looked in the Art Scroll Hebrew, right? It says, because of Sifro, Sefer Torah. That's what it says, Sefer Torah, right? But, Reb Yaakov has a good question. I mean, in Sefer Yirmiyahu, Sefer Kinnos, or Sefer Eicha, it doesn't say that Baruch wrote it. It says Yirmiyahu wrote it because he was Mechabered. So this must be talking about the Mechaber. The Gemara doesn't talk about the other 4 volumes because that God wrote. So that's not going to say put Moshe in there. Ki Moshe Rabbeinu lo chibram, ela had teacup. He wrote them over. Ki Moshe Baruch ben Uri kosav Sefer Kinnos b'Torah's Libla. Avol Yirmiyahu ha'mechaber shalem. That the Gemara says clearly that Yirmiyahu is the mechaber of Sefer Kinnos or Sefer Eicha. Al korchach Sefer Moshe be'emes ach v'rak. Next page, Dvarim. It's only Dvarim in the Gemara. And the Gemara means Moshe Rabbeinu actually put it together. He's the Mechaber. And that's why Sefer Dvarim is Miyuchad. Because it was Moshe wrote a book that was Miyuchad for the Melech. When he comes into Eretz Yisrael, he organized it in a way that would have Inyonei Malchus in it. It would have Inyonei Milchamos in it. It would have Inyonei Mishpacha in it. It would have, it would be a national work that the king would have in front of him. And therefore, before Yoshua entered Eretz Yisrael, what book should he have? He should have Sefer Devarim because he's entering Medina, creating Medina Yisrael. That's what we did. That we already did. What was special about Sefer Devarim? Umasha kol Torah, shekol Torah al kol chamisha sifrei biyachad dikras Torah's Moshe. Okay, we know that in many places that Torah, the whole Sefer Torah is called Torah's Moshe, right? Kvar amru Chazal, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu LeMoshe, Ho miatata atzmacha. Tikra al shemecha, because you were such an honor, I'm going to call it on your name. Shenema zichru Torah's Moshe Avdi. By the way, it's not the only place. There are many places where the Sefer Torah is called Torah's Moshe. At the beginning of Sefer Malachim, for instance, David tells Shlomo he has to keep Sefer Torah's Moshe, right? So it's many times called Torah's Moshe. So Reb Yaakov is differentiating between Sefer Moshe and Torah's Moshe. Why? Because Torah's Moshe is called on Moshe's name because he was a teacher. He taught the Torah. You teach the Torah, it becomes your Torah. Torah's Moshe. Sefer Moshe, if Moshe didn't write it, that's not shaykh to Moshe, that's shaykh to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Sefer. Right? Torah's Moshe, teaching the Torah, because Moshe was Rabbeinu. Soloveitchik always says, we never say Moshe Avinu, Moshe Nivienu, right? He was a Navi, the greatest Navi. We never call Moshe a Navi. Did you ever hear Moshe Rabbeinu? Because Moshe didn't star in any show except Matan Torah. Soloveitchik says that's why he's not listed in Haggadah Shel Pesach, because that's not where he stars. That's where God stars. He stars on Shavuos, right? Matan Torah. So Moshe Rabbeinu is called Moshe Rabbeinu because he was our Rabbeinu. He was our teacher. He's the first teacher. And he taught us Torah. That's why it's called Torah's Moshe. Sefer Moshe, if Moshe didn't write Dvarim, it wouldn't be called Sefer Moshe. Because that's Shaykh to Hashem. If it's God wrote it, it's Shaykh to Hashem.
So where did Hashem write down the first 4 books then? And then Moshe was only Ma'atikotam.
In other words, God said to Moshe, the way the Gemara says is, God orally said it to Moshe. Moshe repeated what God said and then wrote it. That's the Gemara in Baba Basra Daf Tes Vav. Kadosh Baruch Hu Amar, Moshe Amar v'Kosav, Kelibler, it says over there, Kisofer Kelibler.
And that's like Baruch.
And that's like Baruch. See, according to if you learn that the Gemara Moshe Kosav Sifro means the whole Torah, right? So the same way that's called Moshe writing the Torah is called on Moshe's name. He wrote Moshe Kosav Sifro, right? So Baruch should also write Moshe Baruch Kosav Sifro, right? But Baruch was only a Liebler. So when the Gemara says, who wrote Eicha, Kinus, it says Yirmiyahu wrote it, right? Mechaber it, because it's talking about Chibur, the Mechaber, right? The fact that someone else types it up is absurd. I mean, all books that people wrote till very recently, someone else typed up, I'm sure. The guy who wrote the book wasn't necessarily a typist. He had a secretary who was doing it, right? But you never say the secretary made that great novel, or the secretary made, The Revolt, or, Exodus, or whatever it is. You never say the secretary wrote it. You have the author, right? The guy who sat and thought about it and put it in words, right? So Reb Yaakov says, Moshe Kosav Sifro can't mean the Sefer Torah. That the Gemara never asks who wrote the Sefer Torah. The Gemara doesn't put God in there. It says, who wrote it? HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kosav. We're talking about human beings here. We're not talking about God. So Moshe Kosav Sifro and Parshas Bilam, which we still didn't answer, right? Parshas Bilam, that makes sense, right? That it's Sefer Devarim. That's what Reb Yaakov said. Now, I never asked Reb Soloveitchik. I was going to ask him about this Gemara, Moshe Kosav Sifro, and the problem with Sefer Yirmiyahu if he learns it on the whole Sefer Torah, because he shut me down. I was going to ask him, but he didn't let me talk anymore, right? So we never got to ask him what he thought about how to learn this Gemara. But that remains. That's the way Reb Yaakov. Reb Yaakov, by the way, said Ulai. But when I spoke to Reb Yaakov about it, he was pretty certain that he was right about how to learn the Gemara. Now, Art Scroll Shas, I checked today, doesn't even use Reb Yaakov as an option, right? And that Gemara, Kosav Sifro, it says the whole Sefer Torah. It doesn't bring the problem with that, and it doesn't bring Reb Yaakov as an option, even though the Art Scroll knew Reb Yaakov, but it was probably too controversial to write it down. Okay, but as I said, Reb Soloveitchik felt it was very controversial, and but we have the Ravon already that says that. You have the Gemara that talks about Mishnah Torah. The clothes of Mishnah Torah are said by Moshe Rabbeinu. You have the Ravon says Smuchim in Mishnah Torah because Moshe Rabbeinu Chibra, Moshe Rabbeinu Sidram. So there is already differences over here that you see from Mishnah Torah being different. So Reb Yaakov takes it one step more and says that Moshe Rabbeinu put it together. It's when they finally had to write it, put it together. But you're going to ask me, what does it have the same din of Torah, or is that Nevi as din of Nevi'im? Right? That's going to be the problem. Reb Yaakov is going to discuss that problem. Okay? And he says,
the new mitzvahs. And the new mitzvahs that are in Mishnah Torah.
Right. So, of course, Reb Yaakov is saying that God gave Moshe those mitzvahs at Sinai. There's no question. The vast majority of those mitzvahs are given at Sinai. By the way, not all 613 mitzvahs are given at Sinai. L'chora. I'll tell you why. Normally, in the Baal Tshuva world, the Kiruv rabbi says 613 mitzvahs, they stood at Sinai, you got them. Now, Reb Yaakov would admit that most of the mitzvahs were given at Sinai. But let's say the mitzvah of Lo Yavo Amoni Ma'avi B'Kahal Hashem, right? Well, that didn't become a mitzvah till they didn't feed the Jews, right? So it was given by God. It wasn't Moshe decided, God decided, but it wasn't at Sinai. That was already, they had been in the desert for a good few years when that whole story happened, right?
And Benot Tzlaf Chad?
What?
And Benot Tzlaf Chad?
No, Slavcha, the Ramban raises this issue in the Sefer HaMitzvos, and he's okay with it. You know, he says HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe to do this. It doesn't. Sinai is not Halach Moshe Sinai. In other words, Sinai is not the end all. The reason why Sinai is important is not because there's a mountain there. It's important because God spoke to Moshe there. So if he spoke to Moshe in Arvas Moav, it's just as good. So Moshe could have given how to get married, how the Jews should get married at Sinai. 3 ways, right? Neisha Niknas, Shlosha Drachim, right? Kesef Shtarubiyah, right? But where did he put it? He told God, we have to put this in Sefer Dvarim because it has to do with family life. It has to do with the Ophi of Klal Yisrael, right? And the God agreed. Hiskam HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Actually, Reb Yaakov, I remember, said to me, Aval Hiskam HaKadosh Baruch Hu al Yado. God agreed with it, which is a Lashon HaMishnim, Psachim, right? Hiskam HaKadosh Baruch Hu al Yado, right? So here, Reb Yaakov goes into, okay, you know what? We'll take questions and we'll finish this part up next week. There's a few, there's one problem I want to bring up, but we're not going to discuss it now. The Sefer Moshe, in Sefer Divrei Hayamim, which it appears, I think, twice, right? The one that says, Lo Yumsu Avos Al Banim, okay? When it appears in Sefer Malachim, it says over there, Kakosov B'Sefer Torahs Moshe. It doesn't say Sefer Moshe, okay? The same story, but in Sefer Malachim, it has Sefer Torahs Moshe, and in Divrei Hayamim, it says Sefer Moshe, and Reb Yaakov tries to answer why. We'll have to talk about that next week. Does any questions on what I said on this earth-shattering Chiddush of Reb Yaakov?
Did he used to teach it publicly ever?
This, I'm pretty sure he said this publicly.
Okay.
Again, I don't know if he said it like, he announced it to Klal Yisrael, but I'm pretty sure he said it publicly. But, some of the family wanted to play it down. But, Rabbi Yaakov was okay with it, because he said that, you see that from Rishonim, from the Gemara, that Sefer Dvarim is different. So we can, again, Rabbi Yaakov is not saying that, and we'll talk about it next week. Rabbi Yaakov is going to talk about it as Kedusha Sefer Torah. It doesn't have a Kedusha of Nevi'im. Kedusha Sefer Torah, he's going to explain why. But the point is that Rabbi Yaakov is not saying that Moshe Rabbeinu made up mitzvos. He didn't make up mitzvos. You even see what you mentioned, B'no Slavchad, right? What does Moshe say? Let me hear what God has to say about it. Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't paskin. He said, let me hear what God has to say about it, right? So all these mitzvahs, right, that he wants to hear what God has to say, are also Pesach Sheni, right? Jewish people ask, let's hear what God has to say about Pesach Sheni. We'll make a second Pesach or not, right? Everything Moshe is saying, he's getting from God. Whether it's from Sinai and Arvas Moav, he's getting it from God. When he put together the Sefer Torah, a lot of times I get Balei Tshuva in the school that say to me, did Moshe Rabbeinu come down with that Sefer Torah, in his hand with the Paroches and Sefer Torah in his hand, just gave it to the Jewish people? So I said, first of all, the Sephardim are going to say he came out with this round thing, not with that thing, right? They'll say, I said to the girls, the women, I say, and I don't think it had, it had a Lezecher Nishmas on it, on the cover, on the mental. It had I said, Moshe Rabbeinu basically told the Jews the written law of each mitzvah, right? The law of each mitzvah. He came down with a flashcard, and it said, Lo Savashal Gedi B'Chalevi Mo. Right, and he said this means kashrus, and he started explaining orally the basic idea of kashrus. Then he went to the next one. Again, I don't remember. I know Jonathan is staring at me over here, and I know that book that you quoted. I don't know does he learn like this also? I don't remember. I mean, I read that book, but I don't remember if he learns like this. What? I don't think he says Moshe Rabbeinu came down and saved it, because the Rambam writes in the name of Chazal that at the end of Moshe's life, he put the Sefer Torah together. It wasn't put together till the end of his life. That's when God dictated it to him, not on Sinai. And Sinai, he dictated to him individual psukim, Shabbos, right? It says, Lo Sasa Kol Malacha, right? Bayom HaShvi, Lo Sasa Kol Malacha, right? So Moshe Rabbeinu gave the written law, You shouldn't do malacha. And he said the oral law is 39 malachas, right? And he gave over the 39 malachas orally. That's what Sinai looked like. One mitzvah at a time. That's what it looked like. And then at the end of his life, he wrote down the Sefer Torah. So at that point, Reb Yaakov would say Moshe Rabbeinu was also involved in the decision what mitzvahs to include there. Now, I don't know if Moshe had the idea and God agreed, or God left it to Moshe Rabbeinu. I don't know. I feel like Reb Yaakov was saying that Moshe Rabbeinu had an idea and God agreed with him. He said it's a good idea that Sefer Dvarim should be the Sefer Shel HaMelech. And we should include in there all the things that a Melech needs to run a country with. Again, I haven't gone through all the mitzvahs to figure out if they all exactly fit. And Reb Yaakov never went through it with me. I never was able to say, okay, let's learn through the whole Sefer Dvarim right now and see how each mitzvah fits. I wish we would have done that, but I don't think he would have had the time for me to sit and do that. But, but that's clearly what Reb Yaakov felt about Sefer Dvarim, that what its tochen was different, and what Moshe did to Sefer Dvarim was different than what was done to all the other Svarim. Okay, so guys, should I send you what I didn't send you this week? Should I send it to you, or you already have it?
I don't have it, for example.
Oh, you don't have what we had this week.
I mean, I have it because Pinchas copied it, but
Okay, is it better if I send it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so I'm going to send it next week, Bezrat Hashem, plus some new stuff that we'll need to have.
Okay.
And we'll finish this Inyan by next week.
Okay, thank you, Shakayach.
No problem. Take care. We'll be in touch.